All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the only coast to coast radio show that's all about the information economy. It's called Inside Analysis. Yours truly, Eric Kavanagh, here with a couple worldwide legends in the industry, folks. I'm super excited to have my buddy James Lee Wynn on the show from Unpress. You'll be hearing a lot more from Unpress in the coming months and years. And Alvin Fu of Zero Two Launch, dialing all the way in from the other side of the planet. So he is a dedicated man, as always. And today we're going to talk about newer media. What's happening with the media? I'm a 35-year journalist. I've witnessed what I would call the de facto collapse of mainstream media. It's kind of shocking and sad and surprising and just bizarre to watch it all happen. And I'm just going to throw down the gauntlet here and, and say at the start of the hour that X is a big factor here. X marks the spot. Alvin mentioned this in the pre-call that if you want the latest news, go to X. They're breaking most of the big stories. And kind of what's happened is that, in my opinion, mainstream media is now kind of like the emperor that has no clothes. They used to have all the traffic, they used to control the flow of information, and so they could do whatever they want. And now the information is all around them. It's like if you can imagine if news is water, there's been a tsunami through social media, and it's now everywhere. The news is everywhere, and the media is struggling to figure out what's their role in this place. And here in America, we don't talk politics on this show, but I'll just mention for context. Let's say there was a whole lot of push against a certain politician for like a decade. And he just won the presidency again and won all seven swing states despite intense efforts by the media to stop that from happening. So at a certain point, you got to be like, all right, guys, what's going on here, man? We want to know what's happening. And there are stories that don't get told. I have a couple stories on Unpress. One of them is about inflation. I asked people, where did inflation come from? Nobody seems to know. They have various theories, but I'm like, I will show you where inflation came from. And I show them a chart that shows gas prices spiking from 2020 into 2021, like from July 2020 into September 2021. Gas prices, and gas is the ultimate commodity. Everybody uses gas in some way, shape, or form in our society today. Even if you don't have a car, you're riding in a car, you're riding in a bus, you're riding in something that's using gas. You get products delivered to you on trucks that use gas primarily. There's a big push for electric vehicles, and I get it. China's got a factory cranking out millions of those right now. That's another interesting story. But everybody uses gas, and it went from under $2 to over $5 a gallon in less than 10 or 11 months. Well, supply and demand cannot account for that. But I'll tell you what does account for that: money printing. Because during that time, the Fed, just before then, printed 5 trillion with a T, 5 trillion with a T dollars out of thin air. You may have heard the story recently. Elon Musk was talking about the magic money machines that are some at the Treasury. There's one at DOD, and they just print money. They just spin up money and send it places. You're like, well, how does that work? Well, folks, when you create money out of thin air, that devalues the money that was already there. That's basically what it boils down to. And if the estimates I've seen are like 2 trillion or so of cash in circulation in the United States, like actual dollars moving around. Well, if you print 5 trillion, and guess who they gave it to? The banks, right? And this is the Federal Reserve that makes the decision to print money for the banks, for themselves. I mean, think about it. People have complained about the Fed for a long, long, long time. This gentleman named Ron Paul from Texas, he was clamoring to audit the Fed 20, 30, 40 years ago. Still hasn't happened. I actually did interview one lady, Amy Poster was her name. I used to work for the Global Association of Risk Professionals, or as I call them, the de facto Illuminati, because they're basically in charge of the risk appetite of all the big banks around the
Mm.
world. So they kind of control the flow of money. And Amy Poster, she was a special advisor to President Obama back during his tenure. And she says to me one day, she goes, Eric, I tried to run the numbers for the Fed, and the numbers don't add up. And I was like, really? Well,
No
that's kind of
kidding.
interesting. I wonder why the numbers don't add up. It's kind of an important thing to know. But yeah, so they printed $5 trillion. My point is, people don't know this story. They don't know what's going on because the media doesn't tell them. And I think it's because the media, by and large, are just kind of wrapped almost like a dog with a bone with these handful of narratives that they just cannot let go of. And it just never stops. And it doesn't matter what you tell them, doesn't matter the information, doesn't matter what changes. They're just stuck on these narratives. And I think that's finally crumbling and falling apart now. And with that, I'll hand it off to James Lee Wen, maybe from Unpress. It's just UNPRESS. Look them up on the interwebs. What are your thoughts, James, about what the heck is going on here?
Wow, that's a lot to unpack all at once, but absolutely. When companies are incentivized to be sensational all the time to generate more and
Mm,
more views, we come down this rabbit hole where the really important stories that we should be learning about aren't seen. There's just no incentive for it, and there is also political incentive. We've been doing the same thing for 70 years. Same format,
mm.
same broadcasts, same people, buttoned up, much like myself, or with a suit and tie and speaking in front of a microphone, but it doesn't really make them the experts. And now, in this new flow of information, this whole content creator economy where you have subject matter experts that have the ability to go direct to audience, who are you going to listen to? And we
Right.
see the effects of that happening, a ripple effect happening all over the ecosystem right now. But the problem is that we're going to come down to is that it's a fractured system. So there's a lot of great people in many different places, but not one place to be seen. And paired with that, we're talking about misinformation, disinformation. I mean, the major networks are just as responsible for the spread of misinformation and disinformation as the so-called content creators who are supposedly destroying the system or being part of destroying the system. I think that we're at this inflection point where, you know, mainstream media, in my opinion, is fighting its last war.
Mm. Ooh.
And they're fighting it and they're not prepared because the rapid evolution from I would say 2016 all the way up to now 2025 has been faster than they expected, and they keep trying to force feed us the same narratives. Trust us because we're on broadcast television and we are the arbiters of truth and we are the journalists, but that's simply not true anymore. The culture has changed, the audience has changed, and you have to evolve to meet people where they are, not where you want them to be. I'm a big speaker on that subject, and if we're not doing that, that means we're not serving up people the right kinds of information. Um, the problems with that are massive. Social media, they've primarily been created for vanity platforms. Facebook was a vanity platform, Instagram a vanity platform, X, which is an excellent platform, is a town hall, and it functions in that regard, but nothing really dedicated. So we're in this position where there's two of these huge ecosystems, problems on both sides, but no focal point. And
Mm.
when you have an aperture that wide with no focal point, there's going to be inherent risk in the consumer coming in and digesting what we call good information or bad information. Nobody knows. Nobody knows
Wow.
what to trust anymore. And I think that's the biggest problem is we need to bring truth back into the system. And I think I kind of spread out a little bit there, but that's my
Yeah.
initial take.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And Alvin, as part of my death of journalism presentation, when I threw down the gauntlet and decided to focus on that, the data and the facts just started punching me in the face. I mean, it was almost embarrassing how bad things were. And I'll give you just one example. So, my first editor, my first job out of college was at a newspaper, and my editor taught me that says, should be like punctuation in a news article. He says this, she says that. Here's what we verified, usually by what someone else said. His point is you don't know. You shouldn't read Senator James believes, hopes, fears, wants, knows. You don't know that. You don't know what this person believes, wants, hopes, desires. You don't know. You know what they say. And let's remember, they're politicians. Like, so they're supposed to be cagey about what they tell you. And it's important to adhere to those rules. And the media just does not at all anymore. And you see all these opinions masquerading as facts. And I'll just give one more comment. I'll tell you the fact that jumped in my face was, when I was in second grade, I learned the difference between a fact and an opinion. It's pretty basic stuff. Well, there was a research study done a few years ago, not long ago, that said 47% of Americans have difficulty telling the difference between a fact and an opinion. And I'm like, that's really bad. Like, that's not good at all. And I think
Yeah.
it's because the media
I'm
keeps
not surprised. Yeah,
refusing.
I'm not
But yeah, go ahead,
surprised.
Alvin. What do you think? Go ahead.
I mean, I'm not surprised. Well, when you look at the current media right now, the behavior of people has changed dramatically. I mean, I have been in the media space since, wow, at least 18 years in the media advertising space, and that hasn't changed. Now, James obviously was just talking about 70 years, right? But when I was working in the media advertising space, the media hasn't changed. The media has been the same as it was, and it's still same as it is. And
Mm.
right now, it's like they live in a world where they have totally ignored there's a thing called social media. I mean, as much as they
Right.
are embarking, they are embarking on that journey into social media, but their social media play, it's like really 1.0, or
Mm.
even lower than that, right? So they are really they have a social media strategy, but that does not look anything close like a social media strategy, right?
Mm.
And they're still back to the same old self, same old mainstream media broadcast and so forth, and the way they gather information are same as before. And again, what you were saying earlier, right? A lot of those information, again, these are information that's gathered, right? And some verified. In the past, I can remember, in my early days, I do remember media companies actually will verify information that they shared, right? That they
Right.
before even before the broadcast. These
Right.
days, I don't think they do that much of filtering, right? They will just share whatever that's being shared on social media. If you look at a lot of media now, they will just repost what has been posted on X earlier, because
Right.
the first news would obviously be from, and don't be surprised, the same images are the images that was captured by a citizen journalist, right? So not much of verification has gone into that, and they don't really ask that much. And I remember I posted some images that on X as well. And I won't name which broadcast company. There were a few broadcast company that came to me and said, uh, who is the rightful owner, copyright owner of that image, or that video? And I said, I'm just reposting. So he asked me, can I credit them to you? I said, no, I'm not the main source, right? I'm actually reposting, and I God knows whether that person who's reposting it, right, was the original. I have no clue, right?
Right. Right.
And they actually that's why I say I'm not going to name which network, right? But they actually reposted my news, and 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 as far as the source is concerned, right, they actually credited me. so 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 it's not even facts, it's not even opinion, right? They just couldn't care less already, right? Because they want to hit the news very early, and they literally just reposted, well, they re-paraphrased those my posts, and then they reposted it. Of course, they gave me the credit, which I felt a bit awkward, right? Because I am not the
Yeah.
real owner of
Right.
that image, or that video. And they reposted
Yeah.
it, and that was it, done. This is the problem with, when you get, now it's like the citizen journalist, right, is actually creating a FOMO into this mainstream media, and they ended up reposting it.
Yeah.
And the problem right now is that the onus is really, as I've said earlier, the onus is really on the reader, the people who read them. Because if you are just reading it, whatever you're capturing, whatever that you're reading from X, purely from X, that may be problematic, because there's also a lot of information, a lot of misinformation on X, right? So
Right.
while X can is doing a great job as far as providing you the latest information or latest news, at the same time there's also another group of people, right? Writers who are posting things, right, and creating a lot of misinformation, and also very biased information,
Right.
especially in politics. As I'm sure, right, there's always going to be some pro-Trump and anti-Trump, right? And you have no clue. The same clip, the same news, right, are being positioned very differently.
Yeah.
So sometimes
No,
you
that's
wonder
right.
which is the right one, and that's kind of challenge, I think, the entire, whether that's going to be from mainstream media and social media, has created for a lot of audience in the world that's reading it. So you really, as I've said, right, you really need to take those news with a pinch of salt, and then do your own research and filter it, and not just copy and paste and share it to someone else. And every time when I see people just sharing, I've seen a lot of my friends when they share things on X, they didn't even bother checking the news. They So it was, they saw the news and they immediately shared them. So I asked him, did you like verify them? Oh, I did not. I just reposted it, thinking that the news, right, is actually authentic. So I think that's the
Right.
problem that a lot of people are facing. Uh, I know X is doing a lot of work on using the community to verify, but the problem is that some of those information are not verifiable, or some of those
Right.
information are, well, probably they're probably verified a little later, but that information has already been consumed and people are
Right.
sharing that already. So I
Right.
think that's the kind of problem. And there's no quick fix to this at this point of time. And
Yeah.
that's the problem that social media has created. And the power of social media, as you know, right, that once it goes viral, right, is
Right.
beyond anybody's control already.
The cat's out of the
Oh
bag,
my,
basically.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, that's the huge problem there is that we're expecting people to actually read the background information or do their own research, and everybody loves to say they're a fact checker, but really there's no no viable data on that because the first thing you do is you actually have to go off platform, you have to open up a Safari or a Google search, and then you have to do your own research. And most people just don't do it. And the problem is any, I mean, I say this a lot, any platform that we use, any function that we use trains us on how to treat information. So if we're used
Oh,
to
interesting.
swiping and double tapping and then sharing, that's how our minds are trained to use all information sources. So whatever
Interesting.
we build actually has to be purposefully built to actually access information. And if we're not doing that, then people aren't going to get the right information. You kind of have to gamify it. Um, and another thing is we're starting to track people's interactions as in micro interactions, where
Hmm.
even a good article is 15 seconds or three paragraphs. That was a great study coming out of Canada. That's all they're being exposed to.
Hmm.
We have to have options, or we actually have to make systems where we can actually go faster, we can go deep, and then the information is available. Not in community notes, not at the bottom of the comment threads.
Right.
It's a fact of re educating people on actually what news media is, what the function is, and how to treat it.
Yeah, no, this is very interesting. And in the next segment, we'll get into things like semantic models, for example, and audit trails and history of articles and things of this nature that the mainstream media really has not fully embraced. And there are reasons for that. Not, and they're not all necessarily bad reasons. They're just reasons for that. But getting to the bottom of the truth is the whole point here. That's what we want to enable. Don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, talking to James Lee Wen of Unpress and Alvin Fu of Zero Two Launch. We're talking about the media and where things went wrong. They continue to go wrong. It's quite bizarre to watch it all happen. And there are some stories in the last number of years. There's a young gentleman, Nicholas Sandman. Many of you may have come across this story where footage came out of him standing there, and there was a Native American in Washington, D.C., doing some dance. And from the cut that you saw at first, it looked like this kid was being very disrespectful to this Native American. Well, when the full tape was played, you realize actually it was the Native American who was instigating and agitating and getting in this kid's face. And he was some young kid. He was like 16, 15 years old or something. And he just kind of stood there and froze and didn't do anything. And the media blew up on this kid. They said he's a terrible person. It was really bad. And then he wound up suing these organizations and getting a lot of money because it was completely disingenuous. And this is an example. And this is not new stuff either. This is stuff, the best shots are left on the editing room floor. And that's disingenuous. When you don't tell this, when you have an axe to grind and you take little snippets of things, that's not what news reporting should be all about. And what we want is context. Now, it's difficult. So, to your point, James, we went from this sort of monolithic handful of people control all the information flow to the exact opposite with this completely wide aperture where everyone is sharing anything they want all over creation. That's a huge difference. And so, how do you start to sort of reassemble and bring some cohesion to that whole world? And to me, it's things like semantics, it's things like audit trail history. And with machine learning, you can start to track things and get deeper into stories and dynamically classify and group things such that people could kind of explore topics. You think of like, there's a great service, Visual Thesaurus. If you haven't used it, it's pretty neat. You have to pay a little bit of money, but basically it gives you this visual shot at words and all the other words around it. And you can see like what do they call those word fields or something where it's like, okay, well, this word is most commonly used, like exploit or fun or whatever. A word cloud is what they call it. It's another interesting way to kind of navigate through things. But the key is that we have to have some history and some ability to verify. And there's actually a site I came across somewhere in Eastern Europe in the first year of the Ukraine Russia war, where what these folks do is they give you a score about the source of something. They say, okay, this is 70% pro Ukraine, that's 70% pro Russia, just to give you a little bit of a temperance, if you will, to better assess what it is that you're reading. That's an attempt at that. But my point, and I'll throw it over to James first here, is that you want stability, you want information to stay out there so you can kind of vet it over time. And boy, when Madge testified before Congress about Twitter, the old Twitter, and how basically almost any number of developers could get to any part of the database, change anything they wanted, and have there be no log files, that was like, what? Oh no. That is not good for persistence, for trust. And that's a big word that we're hearing about all the time now, James. I'll throw it over to you. Trust. How do we trust what we're seeing in the media? And that's a personal thing. What do you think?
Wow. I think my explanation is going to be slightly long here because I do believe. So one of the things that we're doing at Unpress is we're attaching literally a button that goes to the sources and citations. I am a My opinion is that we should never assign a side to the information. I'm more interested in giving the information to people or allowing the content creator or subject matter expert or journalist post up their sources and allow the audience to decide. Because ultimately, you have to present the audience with the right kind of information, with the right kind of story, and then allow them to decide what they want to believe. But there is a huge difference between your opinion and fact. And
Right.
we hope that when people look at the facts and are able to decide for themselves, and it is immortalized within the system, and people can search that at the same time and be prompted to, hey, before you share a story, did you
Right.
read the sources? That allows us to have a system, at least in the beginning, where people can actually have information that is viable. Whether it's going to be good information, bad information, that becomes hard to track over the time, but we're very confident over time with the use of technology, AI tools to help us identify good information versus bad information, that those systems could become more and more robust. Without that kind of education, we're down the same rabbit hole. So I 100% agree with you that right now we don't have that. I usually share this story about the pandemic when I was in Canada. There was this really great article from a news organization about basically about COVID-19, and I read the entire article. It was very long, and I'm one of those top 1% that will read the entire article. And I went down to the bottom, and it just gave me enough information not to make a decision. So I had to see
Hmm.
the sources, and it obviously it had the blue check mark and the shield saying that it was fact checked. There was a hyperlink to it, and you went to the hyperlink, and it went to a European analytics company. Splash page, no information given. So there are failed attempts, I would say, by mainstream media, and there's failed attempts by social media to provide information. But I don't think anyone's really thought it through. But the importance of actually having those systems in place are paramount for any system that's going to come forward and actually provide people with the right kind of information to make the right kinds of decisions.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Alvin, I'll throw this one over to you. LinkedIn has always been my safe place, if you will. People talk about safe spaces because I can just read about business and I don't know politics. It's just business and technology and what's happening. And boy, has that changed lately. Like all this politics keeps funneling in there. And I finally figured out the not interested in this. So I go, I don't like flame anyone. It's not like a dislike or whatever. It's just this is not my topic. I don't want this information. And that's what we need more of, right? Is the ability to easily curate the information that we absorb for our own for our own benefit. And I do think for sure politics is a big part of the problem here, especially in America, presidential politics, because people just go crazy. I mean, they really do. It's amazing. I had this thought when I was like 12 years old because I would see how people would act towards each other over presidential politics, and it boiled down to my dad can beat up your dad. It's like what I thought all these people are saying all the time. I'm like, all right, guys, can we just move past that and focus on things like policy? Politics is about policy and like defining policies and then adhering to policies and enforcing policies. And I think a lot of times people forget about that second half because a policy can sound great. Okay, how are you going to enforce this? That's usually where the difficulty comes into play. But I do think that we just need tools, and I look to Unpressed to kind of move forward on this, tools to help us better curate the information flow coming to us so that we can educate ourselves the way we want. And I want to be open-minded, so I want all kind of stuff coming in. But I don't want the flames, I don't want the insults, I don't want any of that stuff in my feed. We just need tools to be able to kind of curate and get to what we want. What do you think, Alvin?
Well, talking about LinkedIn, I mean, I have been using LinkedIn for almost 20 years already, almost 20 years. And LinkedIn is probably one of the most unpolluted, right?
Right.
Probably one of
Right.
the now
so far.
there is some level of pollution, but if you were to compare with any of the social media, it's probably one of the least polluted, and also because of the composition of people who are using that platform
Yeah.
and people who follow them, people, and then they're mostly professional, and most of those individuals, they are all mostly, verifiable, right? Probably there will be some who has a profile to scam others, but in general, majority of them are verifiable, and because of that, because you're verifiable, you can you're attached to companies and so forth. The likelihood of you trying to be a narcissistic, right, is going to be lesser, right? Because
Mm.
right, but you still get a lot of very rude people. I mean, I mean, if you are going to be on social media, you expect to live with the fact that there are always going to be people who's going to be rude to you, and that you can't help, right? And the kind of information that they share. I mean, the best thing that you can do is that you just click uninterested, right, and then you're done.
Mm.
But over the years, I think it's still the least polluted. And but I think the category of information that's being shared on LinkedIn has actually increased in terms of well, if you compare to before, right, it's mainly business. Now it's a combination of business and something else, right?
Right.
And again, it's really entirely up to you because the algorithm, right, would help you to feed you with information that's being shared by your followers or by your contacts. So
Mm-hmm.
if you have mostly professionals as your contacts, right, then very likely that you see information, right, that's very relevant to you, and that's not happening on most of the other social media. I think in terms of LinkedIn, I think LinkedIn has done well in that space, but at the same time, LinkedIn is also very boring, right? It's also a very boring network. I mean, to be honest, but
That's
it served
funny.
its purpose. It
Right.
served its purpose. And for professional, I mean, in terms of ROI and so forth, I think as a media platform, I think it's great. Uh, and I'm probably getting the most conversion out of LinkedIn if you compare all my social media.
Yeah.
And great for personal branding and so forth. But going back to what we were talking about, safety, right? We were talking about safety. Uh, Now, when you look at X, we're talking about information that's being shared on X. If you compare to most of the social media, right? I think X by far, right, uh, has probably got the most latest information and also
Mm.
most biased information and most crappiest information and lots of scam, right? It has everything. It's probably has got the most lavish in terms of a spread, but at the same time, it's really if you use that as information to drive. I use that as information to drive the latest news. That's where I get a lot of those information and then repost them on other networks.
Mm-hmm.
So but I don't believe them. I don't believe what I'm reading until I verify. So in general, when I look at uh, trust, we talk about trust, right? The only reason I will trust you is until I verify. So general rule is that I don't trust nobody. So when I read something on X, I read something even on LinkedIn, right? I will not, I don't believe until I verify. I fact check them.
Mm.
So whatever that I share, I will fact check them first because I'm sharing to like more than 500,000 people. So I need to be responsible.
Yeah.
And in general, I don't believe in most and again when you look at some of the media that actually position their content, is that what you're going to get is that, well, from any media that you read right now, when they share an angle, every different angle will have different perspective, right? So what you need to do, what I usually do, is that I will try and read from a few network, and I will then do some search, and then I will also look at some of the top influencers and see what they are posting, and then I marry them
Hmm.
together and see whether they are in some way connected, right? And that's how I verify them. That's when I'm sure and certain, right, that the information is correct before I share them.
Hmm.
And I won't share them just blindly, because I need to be responsible when I'm sharing to so many people. I think that's one thing I can do. But again, it's not 100% proof, but at least I can get to 98%.
Well, and
I
this is
think
an
we're
interesting.
tracking
Oh,
on
go ahead.
the top 1% of all people that are actually verifying information or doing a deep dive. 74% of all college age kids use Instagram or other platforms for all of their information, and over 68% of them don't trust anything that they see on it. So there's this huge gap. You have to scratch your head a little bit and start asking, why are you consuming information this way? Verification is key, but I think curation on who actually has the voice. Are you professional? Are you a subject matter expert? Are you a journalist? Those systems would help. Adding more words and more people to the core of content creators doesn't make any sense. And well, I just hate saying the word content creators, because really it's a fabrication of anything that's not mainstream news media is content. And it immediately assigns a
That's funny.
mistrust to the titling right there, but that's kind of not true. So I mean, we have, and I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but we graduate over 95,000 mass communication and journalists every single year in the United States. I mean,
Wow.
the number is just wildly crazy. The cost of education is up to $120,000 a year, and the industry in 2020 supported 36,000 people across the entire industry in the United States.
Oh, wow.
So where are all these people going, and how do we actually, to your point, Alvin, how do we find the people that we can actually verify and trust? Where are
Yeah.
they? That's
Well,
my big question.
that's a staggering statistic, and that's what I like. And you see more effort in this direction. Steve Ballmer is working on this, and some other people are. There's Statistica. There are other uh, organizations. I think that's what it's called. There are other organizations that have statistics, and they are sharing those statistics and putting them in some sort of context. Number of jobs, types of jobs, things of this nature. Those are useful pieces of information because then you can build your theory around facts that come from some reputable source. Even though the jobs reports, they always modify them some weeks later or months later. That does happen, but at least they're trying. But folks, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, talking to Alvin Fu of Zero to Launch. Just on LinkedIn, Alvin has 435,259 followers. That's a little bit bigger than my 14,700 or so, but I'm working at it. I'm climbing the mountain. He got on that game before I did. James Lee Wen also is with us from Unpressed. We're talking about the newer media. You've heard about new media. There's newer media and frameworks and delivery mechanisms and where you're going to get your news. Here on cable, we still watch some cable, and I use the pause button. You can only pause for 30 minutes on live TV, if you will. But that allows me to fast forward over the 16 commercials in between any segments. And of those, 14 are for pharmaceuticals. In the break there, James was just talking about how if you pay attention to what the advertisements are, pay attention to who's on the boards of directors of these media companies, you start to understand who is shaping the narrative. And that's the word, the narrative. What is the narrative? And I have a theory I may have mentioned to you before, James, that the narrative is always wrong because it's a story. It's not the truth. Now, there are truths that
Correct.
can be ascertained, but the narrative is a story around the truth. But anyway, we wanted to figure out what will mainstream media look like in the coming years. That's a very, very good question. I think people who are honest and true true brokers of information will stick around and be trusted sources, but those who aren't are just they're just going to go away, and their audience is slowly inching toward the grave. What do you think, James?
Well, I really think that the future of news media is decentralized, a decentralized hub for subject matter experts, journalists, and citizen journalists, all in one location. I think that a lot of experts and journalists have not gotten the memo yet that independently you are weak. You do not
Mm,
have the market reach and the voice to go out there and compete against the quote unquote mainstream media yet. And I think
mm,
that model is changing. This is the point in our history, culture, and technology where if there is a combination of the journalists who really don't want to be associated with the content creators and the subject matter experts come together as one, that they are a market force for truth. This becomes really a marketplace of information. Once again, coming back to the core principles of the press.
mm.
Paired with that, I would just like to say, I mean, we have over 2,000 news deserts within this country. Meredith Artley did a great piece on this a few years back. 2,000 news deserts, communities without their own voice, their narrative or message. And they have no real place to actually spread this out. They use Facebook, they use other systems, but the one central place for all things news sets an expectation and a level of quality. That's the future. And I think when this model comes out into the world and it is adopted widely, which it is by and large, but it's over many different media systems, then we will really see the reformation of the news and information for the next 20 years or even more
Mm.
than that. But right now,
Yeah.
we're looking for that bridge. And I think Unpress is that bridge.
Yeah. Well, Alvin, I'll throw this over to you. I remember watching the evolution of news media. The first huge, huge jump in my lifetime was clearly the internet. So all of a sudden you get this information. And I remember getting the newspaper in New Orleans when I was living there in the late 1990s, like 1998, 99. And I look at the paper, I'm like, see these stories. I'm like, these are all old stories. Are these from like last week? No, they were from last night. Right. Just last night. But now it's like, it's too late. All right, and that was a big change. And then social media platforms, Facebook in particular, as the first big one, it sort of consumed. Said, "Oh, okay, we'll drive traffic to your sites and everything." And I remember reading an article of a guy from the Sun Times, the digital lead director or something. He walked into his office one day and their traffic collapsed overnight. Why? Because Facebook changed their algorithm. And so all of a sudden now you've been intermediated, I should say, right? You've had someone you trusted another source to be your output, your flow, and they changed their mind. And that was a huge deal. I think it was a real wake-up call for companies saying, "Oh my goodness, Facebook really could." And then of course in Canada, there was some law that came out basically, and that's all these guys just jumped off the ship. They're like, "Whoa, I'm not going to touch that." In California, I think same thing. So, Alvin, like part of the challenge here is that these social media companies sucked up all the energy. And for a while, it was just Facebook and then Instagram. And of course, what didn't Facebook buy Instagram? And then like you got X, it was Twitter. Now it's X. And boy, you want to talk about changing. Like they went from hyper one direction to hyper the other direction, but they've never been very good with partners. I'll say that about X. They always like change the rules and pull the strings on people. But the point is, if you don't control the means of distribution, you're at a disadvantage. And that's what happened to a lot of these traditional brick and mortar media companies. What do you think, Alvin?
Well, just like internet, right, created the entire ecosystem for things to be distributed, right? That
Mm,
anybody can sell something on the internet, right?
right.
And now news can be distributed by anybody, right? I was just talking about citizen journalism, right?
Mhm.
So anyone who has got a phone in their hands, they can become a journalist. They can they can broadcast their news from anywhere and everywhere,
Right.
and that
Right.
changes everything.
Yeah.
And I don't think this is going to I think it's going to continue and grow rapidly because now you got so many social media, new social media that's popping up, right? And and maybe I think what we need in the future, I think is going to be more personalized and it's going to be expert social media that focus onto a specific area. Right now, X is just covering everything, right? And then we talk about Instagram, we talk about there's Thread, there's Blue Skies and so forth, right? Uh, I think there's going to be social media that covers a respective area in the future. Uh, but
Mhm.
but right now is that that internet has completely not just changed e-commerce, but also now completely changed the media space. Media landscape is completely changed because of all these social media players. And I
Yeah,
think it's just
floating.
going to accelerate much faster. And I think that's
Yeah.
why I was asking the question: what's going to the mainstream media is going to look like? Uh, Personally, I think mainstream media is they probably need to adopt and a new model.
Mhm.
Whether that's going to be a hybrid model, or whether that's going to be a media that's combination, but it's not going to be that mainstream media. And I think
Right.
that their business model is completely disrupted, and it's going to be a new model that's going to come up in the future.
Well, and
I mean, we
you
are really at the tail end of the death of mainstream media already.
I think you're right about that. We got just 3 minutes left in this segment and one short one after it. But James, I'll throw this over to you. I think a big part of the problem with mainstream media is the organizational hierarchy of the companies themselves. And what I've noticed, and this is very severe, I would say, in the media world, is that the nice thing about federated, decentralized X kind of thing, and of course, Unpress is focusing on this from a journalist perspective, is that you don't have these top down hierarchies where there are implied expectations about what you talk about and what you don't talk about. And that's what you see in the big media companies around the narratives like global warming or climate change or these things that you're supposed to talk about all the time and you're not supposed to challenge certain things. And that is just, I think that's the death knell of big media because that's why you're not getting the actual stories because the reporters are afraid to say things because they're worried they're going to lose their jobs. I mean, I've seen the look in the eye of serious like establishment reporters when they see the business guy who's kind of in charge of things who just up so, strutting around the office. I saw this at a big event a couple of years ago and it was really weird, but I think that's the problem. 2 minutes, go ahead.
Oh, okay, 2 minutes. No, that's a lot to cover in 2 minutes. If we look at really who's on the board of directors, who's running the company, the legacy of the company, you don't work your entire career to become CEO of CNN or any other major news network just to want to tear it down to its foundations and rebuild it. So what they're doing really is they're doing the edits and they're keeping it alive. Um, I don't believe that any new news organization like ours, where I consider us a pipeline and a platform, we are not the brand. So we are not the arbiters of truth. We don't have the brand guidelines where this is what you can say, this is what you can't say, and this is where a lot of the failings happen because you actually have to abide by a very strict rule set on what's acceptable to say to that audience. And I think that's the problem. I think the problem goes even further is that when we have other platforms emerging that are right wing or left wing, they position themselves just solely on those two sides. You're missing a lot of the market. You're not serving the population. So
Right.
it's a really a balanced approach. Really tearing down that structure is so important because without doing that and without the people seeing you do that, it's not like us in our professions. We look from a very particular window, but the consumer, what they see is they see a constriction of information saying that you don't want to talk about this because you have political alignments. You don't want to talk about this because you are pro pharma or you're pro government or you're pro anti
Right.
government, one
Right.
party or another. Um, this is damaging the ecosystem, and
Yeah, let's
it's
let's pick that
continual
up for the
here.
Yeah, let's pick this up after the break. Podcast bonus segment is coming up next. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis. Time for the podcast bonus segment with Alvin Fu of Zero to Launch and James Lee Wynn of Unpress. And Alvin, you made a really good point in the break there a moment ago. And I've thought this myself, and I think this is why it's getting so weird out there because we are at the tail end of this long journey of so called broadcast media. And you just think about it, it's not complicated when you think about it. There used to be a handful of sources that literally broadcast over the airwaves, and that's where people would get their information. They gather around the television in the 1950s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s and just absorb what the mainstream media told them. There was a lot of agreement amongst mainstream media of what to talk about and what not to talk about. And now We just threw the chessboard off the table, and all the pieces are just bouncing around on the ground. So how do you make sense of all that? And I think your point was that as the situation gets more dire, you're going to see even more desperate attempts to push people in one direction or some other direction, and it's going to be even more volatile than it has been, which is kind of hard to believe because it's been pretty darn volatile. But what do you think, Alvin?
Well, as I've said earlier, I think this is just going to be dire. I think it's going to accelerate much faster. The death of media companies, as I've said earlier, I think is we're almost at the tail end already.
Right.
And they have, well, I remember in those days when I was doing advertising. I remember when we were kids, right? When we were watching advertising, we would believe whatever advertising that's on TV. If Coca Cola tells you talks about happiness, we'll watch it and be happy. And we actually believe that if we drink Coca Cola, we'll be very happy, right?
That's
But
funny.
fast forward, into the 21st century, any advertising that comes onto your TV, it comes onto your laptop or even your mobile, right? The first thing that comes to you is that you're trying to like first, you're trying to like get that advertising off my screen, right? And even if there's an advertising, right, the first thing that comes to your mind, I don't believe in it. The more advertising that
Right.
you serve me, right, the more I don't believe you. So that
Right.
is that is how things have changed over the years. That people used to believe advertising because there were only that many TV broadcast station company, right? In those days.
Right.
Now
Right.
abundant, right? And now you've got all these online video providers and so forth. So there's abundant of information, and that has in many ways, right, caused people to despise advertising, and they start to question the to question advertising being, is that real, is that true? And I think people are getting smarter in that sense, and because they can cross check, they can fact check, right? so
Right.
so media has changed dramatically in that sense, and not just mainstream media news but also advertising, that people don't believe in it. So the more
Yeah.
you serve, the more people don't believe you.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the same thing. I'll throw it over to James to comment on this, but I've even talked about this in some presentations where implicitly now, to Alvin's point, you don't believe what you're hearing, but we've learned to sort of accept it as like the number one brand and number first in its class and things of this nature. Like there's all this hyperbole in advertising. It's everywhere, but we're just kind of numb to it now. So we don't really fall for it. We don't really fall into it so much. We go out and buy the products we buy. But to Alvin's point, I think a lot of people really just implicitly don't trust the advertising that they hear, and that's another problem. Of course, and there are product placements everywhere. I mean, in the songs, like you could tell, it's like really prevalent these days. Like a Sabrina Carpenter song has Nintendo. It has like all these brand names in there, and I'm sure in their contracts they get like a little like Hennessy. What's her name says, "I'm so much fun without Hennessy." Like all these musicians reference Hennessy because Hennessy is a sponsor of the music label. That's why you're hearing it in the songs. But it's like it's weird because we don't trust the advertising and we don't trust the media. So who are we going to
but
trust?
but
Closing
there
thoughts.
is a change. I mean, the changes is that people tend to trust people, right?
Yeah.
So there's the tendency now is that people trust influencer,
Mm,
right? So you get like, let's say Mr. Beast, or you get some of the very big influencer. They are more trusted than mainstream media. They are
right.
more trusted
That's
than
true.
brands. So
Right.
a lot of brands are working with influencers, right? Because they could be an industry expert, they can be that category expert, right? That people are more
Interesting.
likely to believe and trust them. So
Right.
that's why when you look at citizen journalism, when you talk about industry expert, right, the tendency of trust is a lot more higher.
Yeah. That's a good
It's
point.
that
That is why
authenticity,
influencers come
really.
in. Yeah. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, it's really that authenticity right now that is, I wouldn't say it's emerging. It's we just want to listen to people who speak like us, who tell us in plain terms. And when we see more and more advertising, I start thinking, who's paying for this story? And
Right.
what's their story? Right?
Right.
Why are they paying for the story? And are we beholden to the advertiser? And and talking about news organizations become loud and more and more and more loud just because they're lacking revenue. So the louder they yell and the more sensationalized it becomes, is they're believing the more traffic they're going to get. And to some
Right.
extension, that's true. I
Right.
mean, talk about damaging, but it's an entire can of worms. You know, the business model is broken. The CPM model clearly doesn't work. And
Right.
all we want to do is find people who can just tell us the truth. Tell me what's
Right.
happening in your neighborhood. Tell me what's happening in the markets. You're an expert. You tell me. Don't let a journalist tell me. They're reading from a script. They don't know what the hell is going on. And that's what
Right.
it feels like. So that authentic voice is something that actually I long for. That's what I look for. People who speak plainly, who know what they're talking about. And the advertising, I mean, you're right. It is just all over the place. First thing you do, you know, you're on your phone and you're tapping. How do I pass it? And then it immediately links through. I mean, I think we've all had enough, and that overflow of information makes all of us just check out. Now
Hmm.
we're just passively consuming. We're not even thinking anymore. And I
Wow.
think that's one of the largest problems in the news media right now. Media networks, period. You know, across
Right.
platform from legacy,
Right.
and it's what ability do we have to make a change in the world,
Yeah.
and how can we change the systems to
Right.
make them more focused, and
I, I
Well,
think
I
the
tell
key
you,
here is
go ahead.
authenticity. Yeah, authenticity. That's key, and that's what a lot of industry experts and also influencers are able to impart, and that's why a lot of people will listen to people like me, people like yourself, because they can relate, right? And I'm not being paid to promote anything, right? I just say whatever I feel like saying, similar to you, right? So
that's
so
right.
people connect people, and there's a lot of trust there.
Yeah. That's wonderful
And
stuff.
that's
And
the most important piece of the trust. I mean, I was talking to a good friend of mine who is a part of the Hispanic community within the United States, which is the second largest community in the United States, and they don't really have a voice. Excuse me, but the voices that they hear are really not catering to them. They just want to hear from their own people. They want to hear what's going on. They want to do that, cross platform. And that's right. That's no glaze over, no hidden agenda. The story, the medium is the message. So really, the mediums that we're using, that is the messages that we're going to be promoting. Uh, I think we have to just do a better job. Not only that, I think we need to build a place for them. We need to
yeah.
build a place for the truth tellers of this world that are actually incentivized to tell the truth and speak to
Hmm.
their audience. And
Yeah.
one last thing I'd like to touch on is uh, what scares the hell out of me the most, even with kids, with the high school, college students, is hyper personalized bubbles. We've
Mm.
touched a little bit on algorithm, but we're really not talking about the effects of algorithms. And when we say we like something or we dislike something, and then we get further and further on the right or further and further on the left, then in the real world, what that translates to is hyperpolarization.
Yeah.
That is one of, I think, the biggest dangers of our time. And it's really about having the real people tell us the stories or give us the information in a way that, listen, this is just what's happening in my world, and having us understand what's happening. So
Yeah.
I live, eat, and breathe that every single day. And it's one of my true passions here.
Well, that's a great closing comment, and big thanks to Alvin Fu from Zero Two Launch, dialing in from the other side of the planet, quite literally, and James Lee Wen in a crazy, hectic travel schedule, dialing in for this very special show. Send me an email if you want to be on this show, info@insideanalysis.com, and I'll leave you with the point of critical thinking. That's what we're talking about. We want to encourage critical thinking. No one wants to be told what to think, and that's what the media has kind of leaned into the last, gosh, decade or so, trying to tell us what to think. That's not good. And we saw it for sure during COVID. And I would recommend Jimmy Dore, Dore, has got a show called COVID Lies Are Funny. He had this one great line I'll leave you all with, where he said, because everyone was getting mocked for doing their own research. Oh, don't go do your own research. Now you got to trust the sources. And he goes, before COVID, doing your own research was called reading. I just love that quote. Well, folks, it's been great talking to you all, and we'll talk to you next time. You've been listening to Inside Analysis.